guys, we're back with a fun review today because we're talking about Netflix's Resident Evil. Fans of Resident Evil aren't new to the idea of live-action adaptations. We had our fair share with Paul W.S. Anderson starring Mila Jovovich. Last year we had a reboot, Welcome to Raccoon City. And now we're having Netflix throw their hat into the ring with this upcoming series that's debuting on Netflix July 14th. This Resident Evil series shifts between two timelines, one that follows Jade Wesker in 2036 as an adult attempting to survive in a world overrun by many infected with the T-virus, while the other is set 14 years back, involving her sister Billy, and Albert Wesker moving to New Raccoon City and uncovering that their father might be hiding dark secrets that could destroy the world. For the sake of transparency, I do want you guys to know that I've only seen the first 4 out of the 8 episodes of this series. They were supposed to send the other 4 later on after 4th of July. I tried contacting them several times, and I never got the last 4 episodes. So we are only strictly talking about the things that I've seen in the first 4 episodes, so anything past episode 4, I really can't talk about. I mean, it's a non-spoiler review anyways, but I just wanted you guys to know that. As many know by now, it's kind of a rocky road when it comes to adapting Resident Evil into live action and just trying to capture the essence of what made the video game so special. And unfortunately, this upcoming Netflix series also has that same exact problem. It never really captures that essence, and I think this is, of all of the different live action adaptations, this is the one that captures it the least, which is kind of surreal. And I have to wonder why so many of these live action interpretations, no matter who helms the project, they all never feel Resident Evil-like. There still are moments that capture the atmosphere and tone of Resident Evil in its blend of survival horror and action, predominantly when we follow Jade in the future, where we get all of the creatures and infected running around, but those sequences are fleeting and few and far between, as the show does predominantly focus on the past storyline, which is in 2022, current day. It follows Albert Wesker and his daughters moving into New Raccoon City and the drama that's centered around Umbrella. Many people who have played the Resident Evil video games will be very confused by this series chronologically, mainly due to the fact that Albert Wesker is alive. You know, he died back in Resident Evil 5, which is set chronologically before this show, 13 years to be exact, and now somehow in 2022 he's alive. So that's one of the many lingering questions throughout the series, is how is Wesker even alive after everything that happened, because this is set in the same timeline as the video game franchise. I do know that because of the fact they do reference 1998's Raccoon City incident from the first game. But other than the occasional mention of that incident, there really isn't too much that ties this to the video game franchise. I almost feel like that's kind of intentional, but it is supposed to be canon, I guess. It's kind of perplexing watching this series because for the most part, it doesn't really feel like Resident Evil. It almost just feels like a random zombie show that was reskinned to say Resident Evil for brand name recognition. I would argue only one of the timelines even really feels much like Resident Evil, and it's not the one that's set in 2022 following Wesker and his family in New Raccoon City, because that storyline does have some mystery elements to it, but it's mainly about the bonding between Jade and her sister Billy, and how both of them have to overcome something that happens to Billy that changes their dynamic over the course of the season in a tragic way and plays into the story that's set in the future. And if it was a different show entirely that wasn't Resident Evil, I could find that drama a bit more intriguing, but it just doesn't feel right when it's supposed to be a show called Resident Evil. It certainly doesn't help that these are 2 brand new characters to the Resident Evil franchise. Albert Wesker didn't have daughters in the video game franchise. He did have a son in Resident Evil 6, but at least in these first 4 episodes that I saw, that isn't addressed at all. Many of my complaints aren't really directed at the cast. I think the cast itself is solid, it's just the material that they're given isn't the greatest. I personally don't mind the casting of Lance Reddick to portray Albert Wesker. I do think it is extremely weird seeing Albert Wesker being like this loving, caring father figure, because that's a complete departure from Albert Wesker from the video game franchise. However, I think he does his best here with the material given to bring his charisma to the character. It's just that what is given to him does not feel like Albert Wesker at all. It's kind of frustrating seeing him be this whipping boy to the actual leader of Umbrella, Evelyn Marcus. That weirdly feels much more like Albert Wesker than Albert Wesker in the show does. It seems like a lot of the qualities that Albert Wesker has in the video game franchise were transferred over to her. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but that was just something I noticed watching the series. Genuinely, I was hoping that Ella Balinska was going to knock this role out of the park as Jade Wesker, and I do think she is excelling much more at the action sequences, fighting off the zombies, the creatures, all of that stuff. That stuff is exciting to a degree, but the character herself really falls flat. In the 2036 timeline, we learn next to nothing about her character, there's just a lack of depth there, as the majority of it is relegated heavily in the flashback sequences. Because in each episode of the series so far, she is moving to a new location with new characters because she is on the run from Umbrella. So there's different adventures along the way, most of which aren't that exciting, especially when she runs into this like religious group called the Brotherhood, which that section in general is an odd one, but I guess it gives us the best action to date so far in the episodes that I watched. I do think a lot of this stuff could be excused if the action itself was a bit better in the show. I wasn't expecting the crazy over-the-top action sequences that we got with Alice in the Paul W.S. Anderson films, but even for a show, it just feels very small scale, very lackluster. It isn't shot the best, and it just has an overall cheapness quality to it, which is frustrating for a streaming service. For a show like Resident Evil, I expected at least a little bit bigger of a budget. The CGI all around is quite rough. The blood splatters are very obviously CGI blood splatters. The VFX, when we do have practical stuff, I think is very impressive, but at the same time, you do notice just how worse the CGI is when you compare it to the practical effects. Whenever you do see these well-known Resident Evil creatures, they stick out more because you can tell that they're trying their best to hide them all in the darkness because of the fact that their CGI budget is so limited. There's always going to be a coolness factor just seeing all these different Resident Evil creatures brought to life, whether it be the Lickers, the zombie dogs, the giant spiders. They don't really have as much of a purpose in the story other than the fact it needs to remind you that this is a Resident Evil show. Because other than those few iconic imageries from those creatures that we know from the video game franchise, this doesn't remind me of Resident Evil. Much like I said before, if you think of this as something else that isn't Resident Evil, there are moments in the show that are solid, but the alternating timelines that we go throughout the couple episodes that I saw, it really brings down the show as a whole because we're alternating between these two storylines, and it's a very messy narrative. Since in both of the timelines, they're trying to string you along with unraveling these mysteries, but the mysteries themselves, they just aren't compelling enough to care whether you're a Resident Evil fan or not. Honestly, out of all the mysteries that are swirling around between the 2022 timeline and the 2036 timeline, the only one that I really care about finding out the answer to is how is Albert Wesker alive after he fell into the volcano in Resident Evil 5. In the first 4 episodes, that's something that we still haven't really addressed answering whatsoever. It's been hinted at a little bit, but we still don't have the conclusive answer to how that's going to be answered, or if it's going to be answered at all. I don't really know yet because I haven't seen the last 4 episodes. But yeah, all around, the Resident Evil show from Netflix is yet another live-action miss for the franchise. It's just unfortunate that none of these can ever just nail Resident Evil. Like, it really is frustrating at this point seeing so many different versions and so many of them just don't know what they're doing. It was already a major red flag when they were announcing this was going to be about Wesker and his 2 daughters that were created for the series, but I did want to give it a chance. Just maybe it could surprise me, but I mean, there are so many other great iconic characters you could have in this show and follow them. Chris and Claire Redfield, Leon Kennedy, Jill Valentine. There are so many other characters that we could use instead of just creating our own characters and our own lore. I don't really see the Resident Evil video game franchise picking up the stuff from this show, because I don't think it's going to be well received to begin with. I'll be shocked if we get a season 2 for this show. Who knows? Maybe the first 4 episodes of this show aren't great, and then the last 4 that I wasn't able to see are phenomenal, but at least from the first 4 episodes, I'm not very impressed as a longtime Resident Evil fan. Now you've heard my thoughts on the upcoming Resident Evil series. Make sure you share your thoughts down below. What did you think of this series when you get a chance to check out this series? Did you like the series? Not like the series? As a longtime fan of Resident Evil, how are you receiving the series with all this new information, with Albert Wesker being alive, and we have his 2 new daughters, all of that stuff? Any thoughts or theories you may have going forward if we do get a season 2? Be sure to share all that in the comment section down below, because part of the fun is having that conversation with you guys in the comment section. As always, thank you guys so much for checking out the review. I really do appreciate that. Make sure to like the video. Also, subscribe to the channel so you're always updated reviews, reactions, unboxings, and more. For the next time, I'll see you guys later.